let's get our panel up here right now. So Ben Simpfendorfer. I'd like to invite Anne-Laure Descours back on stage. Anne-Laure, our Global Director for Development and Sourcing, Apparel, PUMA. I'd like to invite what I consider, ladies and gentlemen, this guy is probably the funniest German I have ever met in my life. Okay? I know quite a lot of Germans. He's even got a very cool name, Mr. Veit. Geise.
Jesus, you are.
VP sourcing. I've been on a sugar. I've been taking all those candies. So, Veit, great to see you. VF Corporation on the sourcing side. Also, of course, Mr. Christophe Degoux, Senior Vice President from Tal Apparel on the supply chain management side. Alexandre Tunik, Managing Director, Transpacific. And last but not least, Gregory Le...
Don't spell it wrong.
You know what?
You don't want to do
I don't want to do that.
Le Coent.
Le Coent. I knew it was Le Coent. I didn't know it was Le Coent. Okay. Gregory Le Coent, Vice President. Wirquin, Asia. Ben, over to you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, this is a great panel. I'm looking forward to this panel. But we also want to get your questions. So think about the questions. Ben Simpfendorfer, over to you.
Anson, thank you very much for the warm introduction, and thank you for introducing our panelists. I was worried about your French pronunciation, but mine would be far worse. I can absolutely guarantee it. So many thanks. Thanks also to the French Chamber for arranging what has been a very insightful series of presentations today. Much of the conversation has been around the growing complexity in the global sourcing business. China has been a large part of that conversation, understandably. But the purpose of today's panel session is to talk about options in the rest of the world. And I was delighted to see the earlier question. We will be talking about Southeast Asia, but we will also look at Latin America and Eastern Europe, as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. What you'll find is that I think much of the debate will revolve around price versus non-price factors, as well as whether we should be focused on the short-term interests of our customers and whether we should chase that extra 10 cents, or whether we should be thinking about long-term changes in our industry, and how do we balance those two objectives. It's certainly a topic that is of great personal interest to myself. I spend much of my time in China, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, and I can share with you that many of our non-sourcing clients face exactly the same complexities. And so very much looking forward to the debate. We have a terrific lineup of panel participants today. I think between the group, we probably either produce in or source from pretty much every corner of the world. So very much looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. If I could start, though, by looking at the price versus non-price debate, specifically if we could begin with a supplier. And I think it leads on very nicely from Delman's speech. Thank you. Christophe, can I ask you, clearly suppliers are under pressure to deliver lower prices. But TAL is known, as we've seen during the last presentation, for focusing on non-price capabilities, such as supply chain management. But is price still the overriding factor? Do customers really care or really understand about non-price capabilities, such as supply chain?
It's true that TAL is distinguishing itself through what we call value-added services to our customers. Delman presented one of our services, which is the VMI. I think TL is also known for its innovation. We have put a lot of innovation on the market. And our strategy is really to partner with customers which value those services. So customers that come to us and talk only about price, we understand there is probably not a very good fit between our company and these customers. So we try to focus on those customers that are going to to value what we can propose to our value proposition. But the reality is, in many instances on the market, price is still a key driver. Okay? And I pulled together a survey from BCG, from Boston Consulting Group. They asked 300 top executives of 1 billion plus revenue companies. And they asked them what is the top 4 of their criteria to select a location, a sourcing strategy. And it's not about quality, it's not about compliance, it's not about supply chain flexibility that we keep on hearing. So first criteria is price. So price is still there. Okay? Again, TL tries to offer something else, but currently, in this period, price remains a very, very important factor. Now, why that? Well, the reason is that the customers, the brands have been really facing a very difficult time, in particular in the apparel industry. When you look at the evolution of apparel in the past 1, 5, 10, 20 years, what you find out is that the price did not evolve. The price for the customers, the retail price, has remained flat. And that's going to be the case again in 2015. So if some of us plan to increase our price to our customer, that's going to be tough. Okay? In the same time, the inflation, and I took the example of the US, in the past 20 years increased by 60%. And the minimum wage in China alone in the past 5 years increased by 81%, if I recall correctly. So customers are squeezed between rising cost, we can talk about material costs as well, and a customer which got used to paying every year the same price for their garments. So that's the difficulty.
Can I then throw the question back to a brand owner? Anne-Laure, how are you responding to the challenges of rising prices, especially in China, but also the rest of the world, and its impact on your global sourcing model? I know you've looked at integrating that model and changing the way you work with local distributors.
Well, we have debate with Christophe on the price issue. Yes, of course, price will remain a key element in the whole process. But I think price is the easiest thing that everybody will understand. It's very straightforward. Now, if you go into the complete supply chain and try to understand how to manage inventory, how to manage lead time, how to manage the global landscape, it becomes a slightly more complex discussion. So, price is a simple thing that everybody from every company at every level would ever understand. I think that's one of the reasons also why there is so much pressure on prices. Now, I think, one thing that was very interesting in the previous presentation was that the capability of the supplier has changed and has evolved. And I think today, yes, price is important, but it's how you build up your price that really becomes the key challenge. How you manage your price is the key challenge. And, again, on this discussion, chasing for the 10 cents, I think, to me, this is a debate that's going to be from the past. And I really, truly, truly believe that just looking at this extra 10 cents will not make the business sustainable for long term. Now, another challenge for a global player like PUMA, because we distribute in so many countries, is you cannot just be one location driven when it comes into sourcing. And, the problematic for every country when it comes to import, we change location by location. The trade barriers have tended to be increasing over the past 10 years, despite all different trade agreements. But if I take an example, I just come back from Latin America. I just came back last night from Argentina. And if I look at the trade barriers you have in this continent, sourcing for cheap costs or cheap prices from Asia doesn't make much sense in this region because you have very heavy duty when it comes to import or extremely complex administrative tasks to perform if you want to import into the country. So I think it's becoming slightly more complex. And to echo to the topic here on prices, the other big element has been, again, on these trade agreements, how much of barrier you have. If you look at the US today, on certain categories, you have heavy duties. Does it make sense to chase for a very low FOB when you have a very expensive duty when you import into the US? So, yes, price is important, but the complexity also matters to me much more than prices, I would say.
Gregory, then, can I throw the question on to you, because I know you have much your experiences in China, but your company has a significant amount of experience in Eastern Europe.
Yes, we are a manufacturing company with factories in the UK, in France, South Africa, Romania, Russia, and China. And I'm based in the Chinese area in order to master the operations we have here. And we benchmarking ongoing, like I said, like our clients actually. Where is the best place to manufacture, depending upon where is the best place to deliver. China is obviously still an interesting place, like we said this morning. But if I benchmark with Romania to get started with, if you take the complete salary of a direct labor employee in Romania, the cost for the company, including the charge, taxes, etc., is 300 euros. You take the same operator in China, it would be between 4 and 5, depending upon how you pay him. So the difference is from 30 to 60% just on the direct cost of labor. If you add the 2015 increase, which is 15% in China and 7% in Romania, you know the trend is not in favor of China. So that's the very first point. The logistic is very well organized from China to Western countries, but still it takes 5 times more time to get a container from China than from Romania. So if you want to get low stocks, if you want to be efficient to your clients with a right-OTIF ratio, you need to source and to manufacture close to your clients. So that's definitely an important key for us. Being based in China since 5 years, I can say that having a European culture in Romania is definitely a positive point. It makes the business easier, it makes the project faster to deal with a European mind speaker, whether supplier, whether is an issue. It impacts directly the bottom line. The renminbi, we know the trend. We've spoken about it several times this morning. If you look at the run in Romania, it's been very stable with euro entering European market. They have stabilized this. So that's also a very positive point for us. It gives us stability. Being in Europe, there is no import tax from Romania to all the other European countries. And another interesting point, as far as supply is involved, is that in Romania we find suppliers that we have in other subsidiaries, in UK, in France, in Germany, or others, and we can negotiate corporate contracts with the suppliers. In China, we couldn't reach this yet. So that means another negative point for China compared to Romania. The positive point for China is that the transportation cost is still cheaper, even though it's much farther and longer the transportation time. It is cheaper to transport from China to Europe than from Romania to the rest of Europe.
So there's a lot of considerations here, and the temptation would be to focus purely on price. Issues, as Anne-Laure mentioned, about trade agreements, but also time to market. Would you say, are these more important than pure labor cost?
I didn't say only price, because if you look at the European mind points, the European culture, it makes the project much faster. So it also comes to a cheaper project in the end, but you don't want nightmares every time you launch a new project. So it's not only price. It's a big part on price, but it's also on low stocks, on high service to the clients. We'll come back to the price point later on, but it cannot only be price. It's still a big part, like we said before.
Veit, can I be somewhat controversial? Bangladesh is one of the few countries in Asia I haven't been to, and my assumption is the market is always about price. Is that a fair assumption, though?
I think it's changing. Had you asked that question 5 years ago, I would have said flat out yes. I think the market in Bangladesh is changing rapidly. The turning point probably was Rana Plaza, the most horrific accident. And ever since, Bangladesh is turning a lot away from only cheap manufacturing into actually world-class manufacturing. And when you look at factories today in Bangladesh, I find factories that are amongst the best in Asia. You find processes that are well engineered. So you find people who are open-minded towards new processes and new innovative ideas. So I think And you see the Bangladesh market itself gearing up for, let's say, production of outerwear. So they've recognized how many more T-shirts do you need to make to go from 26 billion to the 50 that they target. You need high-ticket items. So they are starting to do outerwear. They are starting to do, besides young ones in Chittagong, they're starting to do a lot more high-value and high-ticket items, suits. It's duty-free to Europe, so a lot of the high-ticket items do make sense to move to Bangladesh. I think Bangladesh is in an evolution, if not in a revolution even, to pick the topic of the conference. So,
terrific. And look, we've heard a lot about reasons to look at countries other than China, but not everyone is. Alex, I know you've looked at Vietnam.
Yes,
and decided against.
Right, the reason I'm 50% shareholding 2 factories in China. Most of my clients are premium brands in the European market, not the American market, where the quantities per model, per color are much lower. So then it becomes a no-go to go to Vietnam or Cambodia, where you need MOQ 8,000, 10,000 pieces, where my clients would ask very often the average run would be, say, between 800 to 2,000 pieces, where China is still a strong competitive edge. It's very easy to import materials. Sometimes for an order, I've got materials from Korea, from Taiwan. We buy stuff in China. Some accessories come from Europe. So it's a puzzle where China is very good at it. And if you do it in Cambodia, you might say it will be a lot cheaper on the labor, but then you would have to find a factory that is willing to do it. You have to send people from Hong Kong or China to control it. So at the end of the day, on the small quantities, very little what you would end up saving. I think it would be a different equation if my clients were brands like VF, where you have a much larger quantity, then Vietnam or Cambodia or Myanmar becomes a much more interesting country. But still, I think on smaller and premium brands, China is still a long way to go.
Perfect. Christophe, coming back to your earlier point that you prefer to work with buyers that aren't just focused on price. So you must be having conversations with these customers about long-term changes in the industry. Can you talk a little bit more around that point and where you see the industry moving?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed with what Anne-Laure said. I mean, I think price, my point is price today remains key. I'm not saying it's going to last. I think actually it's not going to last. I think the industry is going to evolve quite drastically in the coming decades. I mean, Mark touched this morning on the millennials and the Gen Z, right? I mean, those kids, I mean, this new generation, they are so different. And that's going to drive the evolution, I think, of the industry. For example, their environmental consciousness is much, much higher than our generation or our parent generation. And now they care much more about the impact of their action on the climate. What planet they're going to leave to the future generation. That become very, very, very important to them now, which was not even for my generation. Much younger than all of you here, but still. So my point is we will have to adapt to that. Okay? And that's why, for example, TL is supporting the Higg index, because we believe that at some point of time, every product will be rated on its sustainability. So we want to drive that. Because it's very good for us, it's very good for the responsible suppliers. Because today we are not totally playing on the level field. Some manufacturers are cutting corners. And those who are not cutting corners, they are getting penalized in a way. So we're really looking forward to that. But we are convinced it's coming. Another big change is the branding landscape. Today, I mean, traditionally, the brands, they have been very established brands, selling through department stores, selling through their own retail channels sometimes. What we are starting to see more and more is some very small brands emerging, getting distributed online, but not only, getting advertised through social media, etc., etc. And we have to embrace this change. Because, again, this new generation, they don't want to wear the same clothes as their parents, right? What they want is some level of uniqueness. I mean, we talked about customization this morning quite a lot, actually, right? Even the cookies are getting customized, right? So that's a big trend. And we see a lot of small brands emerging and getting better and better. And what we want to do is to pick up the right ones and to grow with them, Because if we stay focused on the big established brands, the growth, we believe, is going to be a little bit limited. And we see all the brands are struggling these days, right? That's why they all try to shift online. But culturally, that's not their culture, right? So I think those new small brands are much more agile. They fit much more with the new generation, and we'll have to focus on those. So all this to say, taking just two examples, environmental consciousness and branding landscape, I think the industry is going to change quite a lot in the coming decades. And manufacturer will have to adapt to that.
And Anne-Laure, I know you have strong views as well on how the industry will change over the coming decades. And we've had a conversation earlier about the fact that you're taking over some of your distributor arrangements in certain countries and sourcing directly yourself, which is changing the way you're having an impact on your global sourcing model. Is that something you care to share with the?
Well, when you look at what was the apparel industry 20, 25 years ago, it was a very easy, straightforward industry. Anybody could buy sewing machines and do something, right? So it was usually for the developing countries, the first industry they could step in and start to develop in their own countries. Now, what has really, really changed is not just the fact that the technology came in through the landscape. It's also, again, the suppliers gain so much in competence that as a buyer or a distributor, not using the competence of suppliers becomes, I wouldn't say criminal, but really stupid. All right? If I look on the sports industry, the guys we're dealing with are absolutely state-of-the-art people. I mean, TL is a very good example. They don't work for PUMA, but they're a very good example. But you have so many of these people around today not using their capabilities is really stupid. One thing which is interesting, I just came back from Latin America, and that was a continent I didn't know at all until 3 years ago, and I was very China-focused, really believing that China would be there forever. Well, I must admit I've been very, very, very amazed and surprised by the speed that Latin America has embraced into transforming the business. I think the biggest barrier to move out of China was supply of materials. China has been super smart and instrumental in getting as much as possible in the apparel world, material being manufactured in China. And when you have this part of the value chain in your own country, basically you capture the production. So, the polyester production moved out of Europe many years ago for various reasons, pollution being one. So we shifted pollution back to China, which was good for Europe, not so good for China, as we all know today. But that was, it was fairly straightforward direction. And China has been very smart in capturing that. I think China owns today, 70% of the polyester production worldwide. So, of course, when you have so much of that power, then you get also the manufacturing in your place because you're so close to materials. Now, what's happening in Central America and Latin America, interestingly, you have this material investment or this capability of materials being rebuilt, because it used to be there, but being rebuilt in the US or closer to the sourcing countries. And the reason being that there is a market, there is demand. When the US tax 33% on polyester, where it becomes super interesting to source from Mexico or from Honduras or from Guatemala. So the capability in this region has been changing and evolving at a very fast speed simply because of this particular US situation. Now, Latin America is another very interesting place to go today because those countries, and Argentina being probably the most extreme in terms of restricting imports, basically in Argentina today, it's very hard to import goods outside of Argentina. So you have to remanufacture in Argentina. So what happens is factories there are investing, and they're investing into technology because the labor cost being quite expensive compared to China, compared to Asia, The only way for this country, for this part of the business to succeed is to really invest in technology and process so the cost of manufacturing becomes affordable for the consumer locally. The same is applying to Brazil today. And every time I go there and I go to suppliers and I see how much of investment, not just in machine, but in process, in competence they've been putting on the table from local talents, not even imported talents, this to me opens a lot of perspective on how to reshift or rearrange or revisit the sourcing globally.
It's a fascinating point, and it's a great opportunity to then ask, Veit, I know you have some significant operations in Mexico, and just as Anne-Laure has mentioned, there's a great heavy automation. You've worked very hard with your own factories there, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, and you're producing at a price that is unbeatable in the rest of the world. Could you share that experience, but also perhaps reflect on what it means for China, but also your operations in Bangladesh and elsewhere?
A long question. Try to keep it short. We got into Mexico basically when we moved production for jeans. Traditionally was in the southern belt of the United States. When that became too expensive, we moved into Mexico. And what we did at the same time is we adopted an engineering philosophy in the way that we ran the facilities and that in the way that we innovated processes that we were working in. So this has gone on since 70, 80 years. So it's not an overnight process that you can jump into. So what we see today is we're making fair enough, a 5-pocket jean. It's not a rocket science garment. It's not a, per se, fashion garment. But we're making a 5-pocket jean in the famous 7.5 minutes, whilst in Asia, probably the fastest maker I know for a 5-pocket jean is about 12.5 minutes out of China. Majority of makers are anywhere between 18 and, let's say, 27, 28 minutes. So there you see the difference. That and the closeness to the final customer allows us, obviously, to turn in 14 days. So this makes the product unbeatable. I can't beat neither price nor, obviously, speed out of any of my markets here in Asia. Maybe allow me to just say a word to price, because I do have a very firm view. I mean, majority of my production for jeans goes to Walmart. So maybe I'm a little bit Walmart infected here, so bear with me. But I think price is not going away. And if anybody thinks price goes away, he'll probably go away. There's no way. I mean, today, when you look at Wall Street, when you're a publicly noted company, the first thing the people want to know is your gross margin. And that drives it. And if I do anything that takes 10 cents out of the gross margin, my buyer would go crazy. Even if I give him a month speed for that, it would still not fly. The equation wouldn't work because gross margin is the driver. So as long as these evaluation KPIs remain where they are today, I don't think price goes away. And I don't see any elasticity at the retail unless you have a brand like PUMA, for example. When you had that, was it Wildcat shoe?
Yes.
What was it, Wildcat shoe? You could have named any price for that shoe, right? People would have bought it.
That was good days.
That's a great product to have, a great situation to be in. But when you are in comparable products, which most of us work in, then I think price becomes a big factor. And this whole discussion about the millennials and the new generation looking for sustainability, part of them are hypocrites because they go out to H&M, buy a T-shirt, wear it on Saturday, and throw it in the waste bin on Sunday. So they're actually more wasteful than our generation today. So I think there's a lot of more facets and complexity in that discussion, but I don't see, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, I don't see price going away anywhere.
Gregory, can I ask, would you have the same response answering that question with respect to Europe, where you perhaps don't have a single large player, such as a Walmart?
Well, we don't have one. We have two, actually. But,
Fine.
as far as Degoix is involved, it's pretty much French-orientated. I totally agree with Veit. I think the price can only disappear when all the prices are equal, meaning that the buyers understand he will have nothing to grab from from your product. Then it will start, and that's what they're doing now, more or less, starting to work on everything around the price, everything which is not the product itself, because the products will be aligned. They will be working on service. what you can bring more to them for free, obviously. The transportation, the after-sale, the trainings, the packaging, anything which is not the product itself would become more and more important the more mature the product is. If we're talking in new markets, obviously there is still place for big margins, but the purchasers will stop fighting for margins when they understand they reach the bottom line. And before that, they will never stop, I don't think.
Alex, does this worry you? You're, I don't want to say you're stuck in China. You're there for a reason, right, because of your small volumes. Does it worry you then that you're operating in an environment where prices are rising fairly rapidly?
Basically, I've been probably a bit lucky, a bit smart. My 60% of my business is in beachwear. So beachwear, we do all the top brands. So it's a kind of a niche market for a lot of brands where they would put all the focus on the shirts, on the jeans, you know, and not necessarily on a part which is an accessory. So there's a little bit more room there. And I've been trying to offer more design or source of fabrics or new materials, so to make the life of the client easier. And I was recently in Europe, I was last month in Europe with one of my clients, was comparing my price, saying, Alex, your prices are more expensive than in Morocco, but at equal price, they would still prefer to place the order with me in China because it's a lot easier. Buying from China, you buy a finished product, you don't need to bother about supplying any accessories or any labeling. While, and you'll correct me if I'm right or wrong, if you manufacture in Mexico or Morocco, Tunisia, you have to deliver and supply trimmings, paper patterns. So it requires a lot more logistics. If you're not built for that, China is still a relatively easy country to work with, hassle-free and very efficient, which is not necessarily the case if you go to other Southeast Asian countries. But I get the point. I think the US is a much more competitive market, especially going on bigger quantities. It's a much more price-driven than Europe.
And I wanted to touch on Southeast Asia. I know, was it 77%? I can't think now. We're looking at Southeast Asia. Christophe, you have factories throughout the region, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Can you just share where you're seeing changes in the market, where you're looking to go next, and what your motivations are?
Short answer is we don't know, okay? But we are definitely working on it. That has been a real important project for us to define this. And wherever you look at, there are benefits to be. So if you want to attack the European market, then probably you are in good shape by looking at Romania. Okay? If you want to go speed to market, yeah, Mexico or Central America is a place to be. If you want to go for cars, because we say cars will last for still some time, well, a lot of people start to talk about Africa these days. South Asia, Southeastern Asia, yeah, still a lot of potential in our opinion. But all of them, they have their own challenges as well. I mean, not a single place is a clear winner, otherwise everybody would be there already. So it's not an easy question to answer. It really depends about your customer strategy, your company strategy. How do you want to position yourself? Do you want to be the cheapest on the market, or do you want to be the fastest on the market? Do you want to be the one offering the best customers? It really depends. It really depends. What we are focusing on as far as TL is concerned is we still see a lot of potential in Southeast Asia. Because we know we can operate in this region very efficiently. We have 11 factories, so we know how to create a new factory there. Actually, we are just opening, as we speak, a new factory in Vietnam. Vietnam has been very good for us. And the second region we are looking at is Africa. That's another region we are looking in depth. So maybe we can talk now or later, but
that'd be great. I'm going to come back to that.
Sure.
Because I wanted to throw in one extra question, perhaps to the group. I'm always struck when we have these conversations about alternatives to China. India, Indonesia, and the Philippines rarely get raised as possible locations, and yet we're talking about almost half the region's population, which I find striking. So we'd love to throw that back to the group and say, well, why not India? Why aren't we all piling into Indonesia or getting very excited about the Philippines?
Well, on India, I have my very special views. I think India never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Love that.
It's frustrating to watch because India probably is the only country or area in Asia that could mimic what China has done. Build a vertical supply chain with trim suppliers there. They have all the ingredients. They have their own cotton. I mean, they're going to surpass probably next year China as the world's largest cotton producer. So they've got all the ingredients. They just don't seem to be able to put it all together. Part of it is their import restrictions. So they've always restricted polyester fabrics or man-made fibers to go into India, which limited India to a very, very small spectrum of the product categories for the manufacturing. You see very backwarded factories in India. There's not much investment in new machinery. If you compare that with Pakistan or with Bangladesh, you see a lot more modernized and modern factories and a lot more investment in equipment than you would ever see in India. So I don't know. At the same time, the Indian suppliers are sitting there and saying, like, I'm just waiting. It's coming from China. So they feel they don't have to do much to get business. And to some extent, they're right, because their business is also growing, right? So, but they don't strike me as being hungry enough to really go after the business.
Anne-Laure, did you have views on India, Indonesia, or the Philippines?
Well, I'm not going to start on India. Well, basically, India for us is a local for local market. I mean, all what we do for PUMA in India is mostly made in India. So we've limited India to really local production for the local market and no export. Indonesia, to me, is a country probably that has opportunity. The thing is, as we're not expanding with so many new suppliers, I mean, that has been the restriction for not going into Indonesia. But I believe Indonesia really has potential. Now the Philippines, same. We not elaborate too much. I mean, the Philippines recently had some favor trade agreements being signed that might maybe change the game. But you know, you're looking again at how is the integration of the supply chain in the country. You know, if there is not so much of material production in the location, why would you be going there? And I think that really drives a lot of sourcing decision today is how is the complete sourcing landscape in the region or in the country when it comes into trims and labels and materials and logistics. It's not just the assembly at the end of the day, you know, the CM part which makes the decision to move somewhere. It's whether you have the complete process being integrated. And to that extent, you know, Bangladesh had made terrific improvements, I would say. Of course, China is the leader here, but Vietnam is the same. You see a massive flow of investment coming into China when it comes into material suppliers. I mean, it's hundreds of millions flowing into the country, building new factories for fabrics. So, you know, that really makes a competitive advantage very high for Vietnam compared to Indonesia or to Philippines or to India. So that's probably the reason why, you know, we're not really looking so much after these countries at the moment.
It's a terrific point. It leads me straight into the question on Africa. Why Africa? I mean, everyone's very excited about that, but there isn't the integrated supply chain there.
Now, maybe one word on what was said. I agree, actually. I mean, India is a mystery. And when you look on paper, India looks damn good. Yeah. Really damn good. I mean, we have our strategy team in TL. They look at all the globe, etc. They spotted India as a very good candidate. But I'm yet to find someone who is positive about India. You know, I mean, Veit, Anne-Laure, we talk in the sourcing committee, etc. It's extremely difficult to do business with India. One word on Indonesia. We have a small factory, a factory in Indonesia, Jakarta, near Jakarta. We feel we have more potential in Indonesia. Fourth or fifth largest population in the world. Quite low wages when you move a little bit away from Jakarta. If you go even to Central Java, East Java, the wages are really dropping significantly. Good command of English. So I think Indonesia has some potential to grow, and we are looking into this as far as we are concerned. Now, it has also some requirements, like you need to have experience on how to manage unions, because Indonesia is known to have strong unions. You have to be pretty good at planning your production, because OT is expensive in Indonesia, more expensive than other Southeastern Eastern Asia countries. So there are some requirements, but I think Indonesia is something that is worth looking at. So your question about Africa.
And perhaps you could introduce a little bit about what you're doing, because I know you're making some early investments.
Yeah. Like I said, that's a region we want to learn more and we want to look at closely. Now, maybe the approach before sharing about what we did. The approach is to do it right. Okay, I mean it's a new region. Okay, really underdeveloped. Obviously, supply chain is nowhere near what it should be. And TL being TL, we want to do it right, and we want to have it in a very sustainable way. Okay? So, to make it short, we don't want to do it the Bangladesh way, or to be nice, the Bangladesh 5 years ago way. Okay, so we don't want to repeat this. Okay, so what we want to do is to move the full supply chain there. Okay, so we want to bring with us some of our mills, textile manufacturer, to build our factory, and as well going there with a customer, such as VF or others, that would go with us and take this challenge with us. Okay, because there are going to be bumps on the road. I mean, we were discussing with Veit just before this panel. That's not going to be easy. I mean, opening sub-Saharan Africa manufacturing and supply chain is not going to be easy. It's already difficult to open a factory in China or in Vietnam, imagine in those countries. So we want to do it all together to move the supply chain and to carefully, second criteria is to carefully select our partners, the mill and the customers, to all agree that we have to do it in full compliance. That's very important to us. Okay? So that's what we are looking at. And if we manage to find, again, mills going with us, the customer that embrace the same value and mindset, then yeah, that's something we may end up doing. So we are looking into that. Now, we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle together yet, but that's what we are also looking at.
Terrific. Can I just, a quick follow-up? In terms of sub-Saharan Africa, price, wage comparisons, have you found it much cheaper than what you expected? Are you able to source raw material?
Okay. Price are cheaper, no doubt. Depends where you go, can go from $60 up to $150, so much cheaper than even Vietnam. I think what surprised me the most when I went there is how prepared the different governments I met, and we met president, prime ministers, etc., how clear they are on what they want to achieve. That was really, really amazing to me. I did not expect that.
And would you be looking to produce in Africa for which markets? Either Europe or the United States? You're agnostic?
Well, for us, we are extremely heavily towards the U.S. Okay, so 80% of our volume goes to the U.S. So that would be for the U.S. mainly. Obviously, there will be a lot of potential for Europe because it's so near, but we don't have the customer base. Sure. Now, the good thing about Africa for the U.S. is you have the AGOA free trade agreement that should be decided in the coming month to make it clear. We haven't talked too much about FTM in free trade agreement, but that's a massive driver of how the sourcing industry is going to evolve.
And I'll come back to that one. It's a good question. Alex, can I just check, in terms of moving, let's say moving inland China, and I know you've been through the experience yourself, how important is it to bring your supply chain with you?
Basically, I set up a factory in Jiangxi province a year and a few months ago. So Jiangxi, just for the one who are not familiar, is an hour and a half flight from Shenzhen. There's no direct flight from Hong Kong, so you can access either from Shenzhen, Shanghai, Guangzhou. So it's more remote. The reason why I went there, one of my former staff came from Jiangxi, and a few years ago I set up a factory in Fuzhou with his cousin. They wanted to relocate, so immediately I said, I'm happy to partner with you. And I took 50%. So I had already a base I could trust, people I could trust, I could rely on. The major trigger was basically to find labor, because this, I think you ask anybody in the southern part of China, what's the business plan for the next 3 years? I'm not even to talk about 5 years. It's a big question mark, because if after Chinese New Year you end up not having workers, then you have a problem. And this is the reality facing everybody in our industry. And for me, being a small, medium player, it was a lot easier upfront to go inland, where I know the rule of the game. I've got a structure, I've got a management, I know how to deal with authorities. So the risk of failure was, for me, a lot lower staying in China than trying my luck in Vietnam or Indonesia. Of course, if you're a big player like Thales, is a different story, because you could send your management. The way a lot of Taiwanese or Koreans do is you set up a new factory in Africa or any country, and you send 15 people there to manage the factory. If you do it on a smaller scale, the risk is a lot higher. And that's something that should not be underestimated. Not everybody going in this country is successful. A lot of people fail, go there and it doesn't work, or it end up in the end being more expensive, because you have the cost that you pay for the labor. You have to look at the final cost, including overtime, inspection, and when things go wrong, you have to fly the goods. So at the end, there's always a difference between your calculated margin and at the end, if everything is late or the quality is not there.
Understood. And we've talked about soft goods. Can I throw a question to Gregory on hard goods? And again, the decision to switch countries, is it different for the hard goods?
There's no reason why it should be different, actually. Our business model is plastic accessories for bathroom, so it's very far away from garments. But the buyer, in the end, is still expecting the same thing. They're expecting the right product, the right price, right time, right quantity, OTIF, best service around it. So there's no real differences in the way the supply chain is organized for a hard good compared to a soft good. The only thing may be the volumes being smaller. We're not in a fast-moving good, so we don't have so many SKUs, we don't have so much volume per code. So the location of purchase is a little bit hard to find, in the way that we will not move to another supplier or to another location if we find a 1 cent cheaper component for one of our products, the volume not being so big as the garments. So that's one of the reasons why we usually locate our factory nearby the potential market, and we source mostly locally. And only on the group level, we have some sourced, organized, centralized, which is benchmarked on the ongoing way with the local suppliers, so that we can always know where we can find the best supply price, supply service, or suppliers, partners, actually.
Terrific. Anson. Can I throw out some? I did. Can I throw some questions to the audience?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
You can throw lots of questions. Okay, time to wake up. You were awake. They were awake. They were awake. I was awake. Everybody was awake. Any questions? Any points of view? Do we agree? Do we disagree? We have microphones. Got the microphones. Thank you, ladies. Ben, just. Is it an interesting question or not?
I'm Hugues Bourgeois from Eastwise. This question for Veit. If I remember well, a few years ago, you told us that you were doing quite a lot of stuff in Mexico. Can you tell us what you've seen over the last 2-3 years in Mexico in terms of new factories being opening up and all the infrastructure being developed over there? Have you seen any drastic changes, and what's your view on Mexico over the coming years?
I have to admit, I'm not an expert on Mexico, because the owned factories in Mexico are not in my portfolio. They are run by our manufacturing division. From what I know from the talks is that there is a lot of discussion about supply chain onshoring into Mexico for American companies, but I'm not aware that any significant moves have been made there.
But don't forget, Mexico is also a big market by itself.
Okay.
And in the case for us and PUMA, a lot of what we do in Mexico stays in Mexico for the Mexican market. So this is also a growing market that requires attention if you want to distribute in this particular country. the barriers also to go into Mexico are getting significant, and opportunities to develop a brand in this market go through manufacturing more in this market.
Any other questions or comments over here?
Thank you. My name is Thaddeus Müller from Fiducia. I have a question for Mr. Tunik. I saw you made a very significant decision in investing into factories. And I think typically the sourcing support operations would not own their factories. Why did you make this decision?
Okay, relatively simple answer. I moved to Hong Kong 25 years ago, right after my studies, and I always wanted to set up my own business and work on export. So I started initially placing orders in various factories, and then I realized relatively quickly that the only way forward was to be invested in a factory. And that's why I decided to open first a factory in Fujian province in Xiamen. I still have that same factory, and I had to look for the next stage or the next step, and then that's why I went inland. But of course, is it a good business to run a factory or do straightforward sourcing? For my line of business, working with brands, you need to own, it gives you a lot more control. Owning the factory, being in a position to buy the fabrics that the clients want to have, the trimmings, develop all the salesman samples. So for me, it wouldn't be a model to go into sourcing, but of course you have a lot more headaches. But it's more challenging at the same time.
Okay, thank you. We have another question over here.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. And it's Güntepe from Freestyle Asia. I have a question for Christophe. You were talking about Africa. Are you talking about North Africa or which countries in specific?
No, I'm talking sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, I'm not talking Morocco, etc. That which is already very developed from a sourcing standpoint. So, first decision we had to take was West versus East Africa, and clearly, when you do some analysis, you find out the West is very much focusing on oil and mining. Plus, it's not as stable as you would like. So definitely we are looking on the east side. The east side has several benefits. Very stable, good governments, like I said earlier, large population, and the wages tend to be lower than the West. Okay. Now, once you decide on the east, you say, where on the east, okay? So then we looked at all the countries, etc., with our partners, because we work on that with different companies. And we have pretty much established a list of 3 countries that we have been visiting, etc. One is Ethiopia, second one is Kenya, third one is Uganda. So probably if we were to one day invest, would be one in those 3 countries. If I had to choose today, that would be most probably Ethiopia. But again, we have not finished the investigation.
Thank you. That's actually interesting, Christophe, because on the Financial Times, there was a very interesting article talking about Africa and talking about how the textile sector in Kenya is really starting to gear up now and focused on taking a much larger share of that global market. Not there?
Kenya is very interesting. I mean, Kenya is almost ready. I mean, those guys are amazing. I can give you an example. The Minister of Development, the Minister of Industrialization, sorry. He took the job a year ago or 18 months ago. His previous job was CEO of JP Morgan Africa. So they manage now to get on board some pretty high caliber people. So Kenya is really good. More expensive, obviously, than Ethiopia. So for a manufacturer, when we build a factory, it's not for the coming 5 years, it's for the coming 20 plus years. So we have to look at again, how the prices are going to evolve. But definitely Kenya is quite interesting.
Yeah, and that's what it's saying. It was really talking. There were a number of articles about Kenya. So I kind of, when I was digging around looking at some of the recent sourcing stories, there were several articles on Kenya. Now, one other country that we keep hearing about is Myanmar.
We agree.
Okay. Okay. So go to Kenya, do not go to Myanmar. That's the message. That's the message I'm getting.
And I could say, you take a look at KPMG's forthcoming report on Southeast, how MNCs are viewing Southeast Asia, you might find a similar response.
Really?
Yes.
So people are going to have to read that report, Ben.
Absolutely.
Good plug, Ben, good plug. Now, the other interesting thing is when we asked that question, 77% of the people in this room saw that ASEAN marketplace and ASEAN location as being important in the next 3 to 5 years. Is that, we're all in agreement on that, are we? Generally speaking, with the exception of Myanmar?
I didn't say except.
Oh, we didn't say the exception, did we? Okay, you didn't say. Now you're
Myanmar in
backtracking.
I just
2015.
believe more in Africa.
Sorry?
Myanmar in 2015. Maybe Myanmar in a couple of years will be a good candidate.
What, 2020?
I don't know.
Or longer?
I mean, still have some fundamental issues in terms of compliance, etc., that makes some players a little bit reluctant to go there, but they have to fix it. They're working on it.
Yeah. They're working on it.
Now again, sorry, go ahead.
I think if you're based in Hong Kong, it's a lot easier to go to ASEAN, to countries in the neighborhoods, than going to Mexico or Africa, unless you have a very big player. So that's probably the reason of the answer why people here would go for ASEAN, as long as you have a structure based in Hong Kong.
Absolutely. And Ben, I think that's echoed by a lot of those CEOs that we've spoken to in the last few months, where it used to be China, China, China. Now, of course, it's China plus 1, China plus 2, China plus 3, China plus 4.
And I think a big issue for many multinationals, and I'll be keen to get the views of the panel, is that they're very keen on Southeast Asia, not just as a production base, but as a sales base, because of fast-growing consumer demand. And I don't know to what extent the panel is beginning to make decisions to locate factories next to their consumers, and that consumers might be Malaysian or Vietnamese. Or
on the topic of relocation, I visited 2 or 3 years ago a factory in Tunisia. I was looking to invest in a French brand of ski wear, and I was really impressed by the quality of the factory. I mean, they were Gore-Tex certified and much higher workmanship than what I was making in China. And I saw that the project didn't work out, but I liked the factory. But 2 years later, they went out of business. And what I learned there, checking in Tunisia, is a lot more difficult to do business than in China. In China, you have this trader mentality. They will try their best to finish the product on time. They will work very hard. Over there, you have to supply everything. So much more difficult to handle. And the mentality is something that should not be underestimated. Most factories in Southeast Asia are run by Chinese management, which I think makes a big difference as well. Working in Mexico, Argentina is not easy. It might sound sometimes easy, but the mentality can be very different, especially coming from China, being used to work with Chinese management.
I think, honestly, when you're a global brand, you cannot not have production locally. I mean, to put it this way, and that's something I've discovered for the past many years, and I'm sure my colleagues from other global brands will say the same. But you have to produce locally. You cannot just continue importing from China forever. It doesn't make sense. So you have to have a strong combination of very, very competitive imports when it comes from ASEAN or China to support the local business, but at the same time, you have to take use of opportunities in the countries when you operate locally. Again, for us, for me, the local for what we call local for local would be India, would be in South Africa, would be in Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil is massive. And I don't think, not taking advantage of what is happening in these countries would really be a business mistake.
So is that the game changer for markets like India and Indonesia? It is not producing for export, it's producing for local sale. That's when we start to see the growth in factories and supply chains and so forth.
I would think the markets aren't big enough to immediately compensate for exports, but obviously that's a trend that's happening there, especially probably in India, because that market is so huge and vastly untapped. I think back to your earlier question on production in the ASEAN region. I think many of those countries are too small to produce for that country specifically, to set up a supply chain for that particular market. So you kind of, either you're licensed out or you have your own business there, but you're shipping from, let's say, manufacturing in Vietnam to 25 different locations. So you're not really only working for the Vietnamese market. For that, these markets are still too small, at least in our business model.
But for China, however, because a lot of people are wondering, okay, costs are getting up. Can I stay in China in terms of manufacturing? But when you look at the domestic market, the requirements of the domestic market are extremely different from the export market. So the lead time requirement for the domestic market is so much faster than what we are used to for the export market. And then having factories in China becomes instrumental to be successful in China in the domestic market. So again, that's something that needs to be looked at as well.
Okay.
On the other hand, you produce in ASEAN countries into China about 20% cheaper. So as long as you have, or at the minute you're looking at basics, we move those basics, even for the China market, out for production in Indonesia or in Vietnam.
But
a lot cheaper than in China.
But if you need to bring your raw materials from China, then you lose time. And labor cost is anyway 20% of our product. So back to what Anne-Laure was saying earlier. So it needs to be looked at closely. It's not a clear cut.
Okay.
But as well, for ASEAN, what's going to play a big role is a TPP, the Transpacific Partnership, that has been started in 2002. 12 years of long negotiation. While everybody seems to believe that 2015 will get an agreement. If that happens, it's going to change a lot of things. We're going to have the big winners, Vietnam, Malaysia, because they are member of the TPP, and we're going to have some countries that may suffer, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, because they are not member of the TPP. The forecast, today, Bangladesh and Vietnam, they are 4 to 5% of the total export to the US. The forecast if TPP comes into force this year, the forecast by 2024 is Bangladesh will move from 5 to 6, 7%, and Vietnam would move from 4 to 5 up to 11%. That's the impact the TPP is expected to have on the sourcing footprint.
Right, quite significant. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I could listen to the distinguished panel all afternoon, but I'm afraid there's a lady over there saying, time up, time up. So I'm going to have to say the time is indeed up. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking distinguished panelists, Ben, Anne-Laure, Veit, Christophe, Alex, and Greg. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. Thank you very much.